Last week, I was visiting one of the great pains in my life and one of my great disappointments. I was starting to do an assessment of the experiences I had had trying to understand and become a reasonable father, and I was not terribly proud of myself. At our last meeting, I spent my time describing my firstborn adopted child, Joshua Martin Kovacs, and all the strangeness and unhappiness and pain that the infertility and then the adoption had brought into the lives of myself and my first wife, leading finally to my leaving. Uh, Before I was finished, though, I said that I was feeling so guilty about a number of things. I was feeling guilty about not staying there and helping to watch over a very damaged and unpleasant child. I felt guilty about breaking up the marriage. I felt guilty about leaving my former wife with some important dreams unfulfilled. So before I could find the courage to leave, I had to try and balance some of that. She had always wanted a home in the Westwood area of Los Angeles that had been where the family home that she had grown up in was situated, and she had gone to UCLA, so that had meaning to her. Also, homes in Westwood are rather pricey. She didn't know she could ever afford one. Before I said anything about divorcing her, I had managed to secure a mortgage and buy a house in Westwood that we could move into. It was really quite a pleasant and nice house. And I felt so terrible about leaving her with a damaged child. I figured one of the ways to make restitution was to start a second adoption and to bring a child into our lives that would be a really sturdy and achieving and pleasant child and help make up for the pain and the duress of raising the damaged one. So we adopted a young girl we named Naomi Kovacs, and she was about 2 years, 3 years younger than her older brother when we got her. I'm remembering now. And the prediction I had made was a good one. She was and is a wonderful human being and an accomplished and effective human being. My problem is I I'll jump forward to the end. I have not seen or talked to her in 4 years, and we seem to have been separated forever now. And it does not make me very happy or feel like a very capable human being that me, the psychologist, winds up with an alienated child who seems to have no interest in having any relationship with me. That hurts. So I'll talk about the long journey from her arrival in her house to where we are now. It's filled with moments of great tenderness and wonder and wonderful interactions between the two of us that somehow went sour, got corrupted, and came to an end. In the beginning, it was very easy being with her. She was delightful. She was a pleasant, sunny disposition child, quite adorable and obviously very bright. And I loved frolicking with her, spending time with her, taking her to the petting zoo at the Los Angeles Zoo when she was a toddler, and just enjoying her company. Uh, One of the things that was special about her was that when the breakup of my first marriage occurred, she proved to be reasonably resilient. She came to the new home and she met the person I was now living with, who became my wife, and they bonded with each other. It was really very, very pleasant. Uh, she took to the new relationship seemingly without animus or without difficulty. Uh, One of the things that my present wife and Naomi loved doing was they loved going to garage sales. That was favorite recreation on the weekends when she was visiting. They would go find a garage sale and they would see what kind of treasures they could unearth and buy for a song and then bring home. And my daughter delighted in doing that. She also delighted that we were very responsive to her and wanted to do things just with her sometimes and not with her damaged brother, who was the center of all attention in the home that she was coming from. So I believed that we were on a good path and that the good path would last. Now, we did not hide from her that she was an adopted child. Uh, and there's a wonderful book. I forgot what the name is. It's a book you can read to kids about the specialness of adoption and how you are the one that's been chosen. There could have been many others, but you've been chosen to be the child of the adoptive parents and how special that is. So because I had not concealed from her the fact that she was adopted, as she got a little bit older and older, when she finally entered elementary school, I said, you know what? There's a growing amount of literature in my field and in things I read that suggests that life is better if the broken connections could be reestablished. Do you have any interest at all in trying to meet your birth mother, even your birth father, and to know something about what happened, how you wound up being adopted, and who the people are that you're descended from? And as a fifth birthday present, I had read aloud to her one of her fifth birthday presents. This was a strange one. I read aloud to her whatever information the adoption agency had given us about her birth mother, that she was a college student. She was studying nursing when she was in school. Uh, her father was a Navy pilot. They had met during the Vietnam War, and he had been shipped off to Vietnam, and she was left pregnant when she didn't know that she was going to get pregnant. He had sent her a letter from Vietnam saying, "Please keep the child. I'm in love with you, and I want to be with you." And so she had kept the child, and then he had dropped out of her life, and it was too late to do anything. So she gave the child up for adoption. We knew that the family was Jewish. I think her father was in the cleaning business. That's what her grandfather did. And that's about all the information we had. We didn't know if there were aunts and uncles. We didn't know if what the fate of the mother was, if she had ever married again, were there any other relatives, nothing, just the bare bones. We had no health history on either the father or the mother, just whatever had been talked about to the adoption agency. So I for the first time, I said, would you like to try and clear up some of that riddle and do something to meet some of the people who come from the clan you descended from? No, I don't want to do that. You're my dad. My mom's my mom. I don't need anything more than that. All right. I said, then we won't talk about it anymore. And life went on, and we started to shift things. We started to change our request for visitation because Naomi was a delight to be with. Josh was like a short circuit. He would suck up all the energy, trying to contain him, trying to respond to him, trying to soothe him, and she was in the background. And I had read that wonderful book, The Normal One, by then, about how healthy children and families where there are broken children of one sort or another wind up really getting damaged. They wind up getting damaged because they're ignored and neglected in favor of the short circuit one who pulls all the energy out of the parents. They wind up getting damaged because they're expected to grow up and to help and participate in the caretaking of the damaged one. And they get cheated out of a carefree childhood. And this is a statistic, a meaningless statistic from hospitals. In hospitals, terminally ill patients get only 20% of the human visits of staff stopping by to see how they are, what's going on with them, than patients in the hospital who are clearly going to make it through whatever they're struggling with. They get visited very often by doctors, nurses, and personnel. So nobody plans that. It just happens. I guess the human race is scared to spend too much time with people who are going to die. Well, it's the same thing with the damaged child in a family like that. All the energy gets directed towards the damaged child, and the healthy child is expected to survive somehow on its own. So I think one of the reasons the bond I felt to Naomi was very, very powerful for me was, first of all, I was a restitution child of a different kind, just as she was a restitution child. And the circumstances of my family life, different than hers, but still my circumstances, led in my feeling unattended to, ignored, and left to myself much too much of the time. And I felt that that was going on with her too. So one of the things we did, we changed visits and we stopped bringing them as a pair. We would visit with one and then we would visit with the other. So all our time and attention was focused on Naomi when she was with us. She was the only child from outside the family who was visiting. And I forgot to mention something else that was just delightful. Both her potential stepsisters, whom I will be talking about in subsequent lectures, really took to her. They found her delightful too. They enjoyed playing with her. If we wanted to go out for a while, they were happy to take over and try to find something to do with her to entertain her. She had won their hearts as well as my heart and Hermine's heart. And that was a wonderful thing that was happening. I'm still heartbroken that it went south somehow. Uh, Part of what happened to make it go south was my former wife was in a constant attempt to convince both her damaged son and the healthy daughter that I was a terrible person. It was a sin that I had left. I broke up a family. I had gone off with some other woman. That was a terrible thing to do. And uh, she was what? She was very contemptuous. Anytime Naomi would go home and talk about having a good time or something like that, she would get invalidated and reminded that that was only temporary and it wouldn't last, and I was unreliable and I was a crappy person. And she would counter Naomi's tales of having pleasant experiences in my household with invalidation and criticisms of me. And that, I'm sure that was very painful for Naomi. And I told her, just don't talk about what happens here. If your mom, could you develop the strength if your mom said, how'd you spend your time when you were with your dad's house? If you would say, I just prefer not talking about it. It leads to trouble when we talk about that. So I don't want to do that. It was hard for her to try and tame her mother. I had never tamed her mother, so it's not surprising. It wasn't hard for her to tame her mother. So she was in loyalty conflict, vile, vitriolic loyalty conflict all the time. It was hard for her to just surrender and enjoy the fact that she had a new family now. It was a different family. It had different cast of characters. There was a different woman in charge of it. And there were two other siblings that were not damaged siblings, but there were siblings that were older than she was. And they were fun people who were doing all kinds of interesting things that they were willing to teach her about. She couldn't surrender and just enjoy that. So let's move forward. Adolescence was coming on. Uh, I had been really unhappy. I had been unhappy with the poisonousness of how my former wife was relating to both of my children. And I was unhappy with the fact that 6 weeks after I had left home, my former wife was living with another man. And I was hearing reports from Naomi that she was having a stormy relationship with Ed. They would get into terrible, loud fights. He would leave for periods of time. They would separate. By the time she was heading into middle school, there had been 6 separations of several days in length or longer between those two, and yet they kept coming back together. And my former wife had made it clear to Naomi that, as she could see, my former wife did not believe in the institution of marriage, and she and Ed were never going to get married, and that she hoped Naomi would have the strength never to fall in love with a man and get married. And that was reported to me by Naomi. So Hermine and I had many discussions, and we decided that we were sick of all of this. Hermine had succeeded in taming my former wife somewhat because I would not talk to her anymore. Hermine was the only one that would have a conversation with her. And things had gotten more peaceful in that way. But both of us thought, as mental health professionals, that does not sound like a house with behaviors and values that we thought were best for a growing child. And should we take a chance? And now it was becoming more prevalent that there were arguments between whether children should live with mothers or fathers. The California law had shifted over the years, and now the presumption was that the two people would share pregnancy. They would share custody and residence, and children were not automatically to be given to mothers anymore. And maybe we should take advantage of the change in the law, and we should start a custody suit and ask that we be given custody of the child. And we decided to do that. And we marched forward and we filed the papers. That led to the next round of pain and misery. Naomi was clearly very stressed because the loyalty conflict had escalated, of course. She had to be interviewed by child custody evaluators. One of the things that broke my heart was she kept trying to design a visitation plan and where she would live on which days and for how many hours, so that would be just about the same for both parents and not too disruptive to her life. She was spending endless hours making drafts of possible visitation and residence situations, and she was obviously very stressed by it. And it became apparent the whole thing she was going through, because it was probably the potential for the final litigation and the interviewing and the harassing and whatever was going on was probably going to stretch out for months. And I felt like I was torturing my own child by asking to be her father. In my offerings, I said her primary residence should be with Hermine and me, but we would be very liberal in granting visitation rights almost any time that her mother wanted to be with her and she was comfortable with going. We would not interfere with that, in contrast to what we had lived through. And we had our ducks in a row. We had a journal where we kept notes, and we noted that from the time we had separated, 81% of the time when we had made requests for short, long, interim vacation visits, 81% of our requests to be present with Naomi had been turned down. And we thought that that would be a really powerful weapon to use against Diane in court. But I saw her suffering. And after many sleepless nights, I said to Hermine, and I think this was one of my critical mistakes, I can't keep putting her through this. She doesn't deserve to be tormented this way. She's done nothing wrong. I am going to take the suit off the table. I'm going to cancel it. it's going to be bad. We're not going to see very much of her, as we are not currently seeing very much of her. One day she'll be emancipated. One day she'll leave home. And as long as the possibility of interaction is open in any way, I can then, and you can help, we can work at it and establish a much more balanced and realistic relationship with her. But let us just wait until she's over 18 and doesn't need her mother's permission anymore, and stop torturing her by keeping her locked in litigation. The more I talk about that, the more I regret having done that, because we didn't see very much of her at all. Josh had finally been placed, as I said last week, in a boarding facility in Santa Barbara, so he wasn't around as much. But when he came, we were still hearing terrible things. He tried on several occasions to choke Naomi. He punched her and knocked her down on several occasions in frustration. She was still living in what we thought was a nightmare. We had moved out of the house we had been living with when we filed the lawsuit. We'd gotten a larger house that had an extra bedroom. We even had a Naomi bedroom for her to sleep in when she came to visit with us now. It was a lovely bedroom. She helped pick out the furniture and the colors on the wall, and that bedroom was still there and she was still using it. But it looked like she wasn't going to come and take up any kind of significant residence with us in the months and maybe years ahead. The next blow came when she turned 13. She had some liberal Jewish education, and she had some affinity with a Jewish temple. And it was time for her to be bat mitzvah. It was time for her to declare that she was a woman and go through the religious ceremony. That whole thing is a perversion. That is a step into sensible feminism, but there's nothing in any of how Jews lived for thousands of years that had anything to do with a fertility ritual or a ceremonial ritual of passage into femininity and adulthood on the part of women. I didn't mind that she was having it. I don't oppose it. I don't object to it. I just think it's silly. But at any rate, it was very important to her. And she was going to be bat mitzvah close to her 13th birthday. I kept asking, where is this going to take place? And I kept hearing back from my former wife, the final plans have not been made. I don't think we're going to go to a temple. There are about 3 or 4 of us that are friends, and I think we're going to have a private ceremony in somebody's house. We've already been talking to the rabbi that we prefer to do that than make a big brouhaha in the temple for the whole congregation and then have the usual aftermath that takes place. We want to have something very homey in somebody's home. And Hermine wrote her back because I didn't talk to her and said, that sounds quite gracious and lovely. Just let us know where it's going to be. And what happened was we were notified finally by Diane. She left a voicemail for Hermine that Naomi had been bat mitzvahed that morning. And she's sorry she hadn't had time to get around to tell us what the location was. And she's sorry that we didn't get a chance to congratulate Naomi or say anything to her. But there was going to be a little follow-up in the afternoon for the girls who had been there and just for their immediate family. And if we wanted to drop any present by for Naomi at that little gathering, it's fine to come to the door, knock on the door, and offer the present to Naomi and leave again, because we were not among the invitees to that event. Oh, we added that to our roster of things that we could have used in the custody battle. But that was just awful. And as Naomi got farther and farther into developing her peer group, taking responsibility for her own life, being serious about her academics. The number of times we wanted to have her come visit began to decay even more, and we hardly ever saw her. I would talk to her on the phone for a while. I would call her and say, "You busy? We haven't seen each other. I'd love to have a talk with you." She'd talk for 5 minutes and then she'd say, "Oh my, I have an exam tomorrow. I have to go." And she was busy with her life apart from me, and I saw very little of her. Uh, During that period of time, when I did see her one occasion, I said, "You're now coming into adolescence, and I teach these contents. I know some things about how adolescents develop. And one of the things I know is that during adolescence, for many adolescents, it's important to know their history in building their image of who they are and who they need to become to carry through into adulthood. Knowing who their family was there an immigration experience? How many other aunts and uncles are there? Are there any other peers? uh, that becomes important. So I'll ask you again. Oh, and the research literature suggests that adopted children have trouble in this area because just like you, they know only a few cursory facts about what their origins are. So I'm offering my services. If you would like me to pay for a private detective if that's necessary or travel somewhere, I will do whatever I can. If you decide you want to reopen your connection with the people who are actually responsible for your life on earth, I'd be glad to help you in any way I could." And she said, "No, I told you once, you're my dad and my mother's my mother. I don't need any extra parents or any extra family. I have enough as it is right now." I said, "Okay, but the offer will continue to stand." I then got smart. I said, "I don't have anything appealing enough to her to make her want to come and spend time with us. Let me make a package that might work." So I got in touch with her one day. She was 16 and had a driving license by then. I got in touch with her and said, "Naomi, I'm trying to get into the new world. I just acquired an early model of a computer, and I'm trying to learn how to use the computer and to use it for some of my business processes." And I said, "Would you like to learn how to use the computer? And would you be willing to take over my billing and some of my correspondence? Would you come and work some hours every week? I'd be happy if you do that. And I'd be glad to pay you. I'll pay you a reasonable salary. Maybe we could learn together. And on top of that, we have an extra car. We have it's a station wagon, an old station wagon here. You know, I picked you up in it occasionally. And we like keeping three cars because we don't necessarily own new cars at any one point in time. And we always have to confront that a car may have to go to the shop. So Hermine and I like having an extra car around. And we just are getting a car for your younger stepsister. So she's not going to need it. So we're always going to have an extra car here. And I'd be glad to, to loan it to you. You can keep it, drive it whenever you want. Only very once in a while, if one of the other cars has to go in the shop, I'll ask if I can retrieve it from you so we can use it. But most days and most time, you can just keep the car and use it for whatever purpose you want. And I'll pay for the gasoline and repairs on it. It's still my car. And it's an easy way for you to get back and forth to visit us if you decide to come work here. Not so far from where you are in uh, Westwood to where we're now living in Westwood. The commute's not bad, but you'll have a car to make it if you want. And she wanted to do that. So twice a week now, I had her in residence from just after school. I think she was able to get over by 2:30, and she would stay till 5:30. And she would work for 4 hours twice a week and then go home. And gradually she stayed for dinner, and gradually she stayed to do her homework there. And I was seeing much more of her. My seduction had worked, and it was very pleasant. I was proud of myself and proud of her. Uh, but I was still having strange experiences. One day I needed the car the next day. So she was 17 then. I said, I'll drive you home after dinner. I understand you're staying for dinner, but I need the car tomorrow and I'll bring it back to you after school tomorrow. I think I can get out of the shop. You'll have to drive me back home again and then you can keep the car again. So I got in the car and I started to drive and I said, oh, you don't have hardly any gas in this. Let me, I'm yawning. I'm still tired from last night. Let me fill this up for you, and then we'll continue on home. So we're standing by the car while the pump is running, while the nozzle is running. And she said, Dad, please explain something to me. I said, what should I explain? She said, you never seemed interested in being with me when I was small. And I was flabbergasted. I had never seemed interested in being with her when she was small. She said, I hardly ever saw you. I said, I have a journal I kept. 81% of the time we asked to be with you, your mother said no. She said, you seem to want to maybe have me come live here more, but then you stopped trying. And I said, you were suffering. I tried to explain myself again. I said, let me show you, I'm not enjoying now. Let me show you the court papers and let me show you the journal I kept on how hard it was for you to be allowed to come. And then on top of that, I was hearing stories from you over and over again about how your mother would make sneering and sarcastic remarks about me every time you visited, and that in some way she was punishing you and wanting your loyalty and wanting you not to succeed in visiting with me. I had reasons for what I did. Some of them were out of my control. And I I figured we'll do what we can. And it seems to be better now. We're seeing each other much more. And if you go away to college, it will become even more than that. And maybe we will heal, repair, clear up misunderstandings, or get straight with each other finally. So off she went that evening. And then uh, the next good news, in her 17th year, she was applying for colleges. She said, I'm going off to UC Santa Barbara. I said, oh, that sounds wonderful. I said, what are you going to study? And she said, well, I'm taking a joint major. I'm going to study French and get a degree in French. And I'm going to study psychology and get a degree in psychology. And I teased her and I said, haven't you learned anything from me? You actually want to follow in my footsteps? She said, I think so. So that touched my heart too. So off she went to UC Santa Barbara. And now we began, she wasn't working for me anymore, but we began to see more of her. At least she would come into town frequently. Some of the time she'd be with her mother. She had girlfriends that lived here. Some of the time she'd spend with them. Certainly she came to see us. And I think I had the flow that's expectable when students are away in college and coming for visits. And my life with her began to feel ordinary and delightful. It was always pleasant to have her around. We giggled a lot, laughed a lot. She liked being a member of the family. And I have no complaints about that era in my relationship with her, although I must be missing something. Crises were coming. She finished college and she said, I really don't know what I want to do with myself. I majored in psychology. I don't know if I want to go to graduate school in psychology. I majored in French. Certainly don't want to be a French professor. I don't want to teach French literature or lecture on the language. I feel lost. So I said, well, what have you been doing? She said, she, this one makes me really sad. She said, well, during the time I had a part-time job while I was going to college to earn spending money. I said, yeah, I know. She said, I worked at the Devereaux Foundation. I work with damaged and autistic children. Josh had gone there, so I was familiar with the place. And I thought if I wanted to go to psychology graduate school, that was a good thing to have my resume that I had worked with defective children. Uh, but maybe I just need to get a full-time job at Devereaux. I wonder if they would hire me full-time. And I shuddered. I felt like she had been trapped by her past. Her whole life was to consist of being deferent to damaged boys and girls, just like she had to be all the time she was living and growing up with her mother. I didn't want that as her destination, but it was not up to me to try and dictate to her what she should become. And I said, "You got any other jobs, possibilities you think of?" She said, "Well, I did one summer abroad in the south of France at a French university because that's where UC Santa Barbara has reciprocal relationships for French-speaking students. They go to that wonderful university in the south of France, and I love being there for a semester. And there were a lot of problems that come up. So there is a year abroad office at the UC Santa Barbara that tries to coordinate matching students with possible colleges to go to, organizing their transportation, their housing, everything that has to happen, serving as a resource if they get into any kind of trouble with the placement at the college abroad. And maybe she could get a job working in that office. And that somehow seemed to me to be a step better than going to work at the Devereaux Foundation. I said, that sounds interesting. Maybe you would like that. Is there any chance you get to travel too to inspect the places that you want to go put students? She said, no, I'm too low on the totem pole to be able to do that. Uh, so off she went to uh, the college abroad office. And I continued to nag at her. I said, look, I'm going to do this again. I've watched your personal life. You seem more comfortable in groups. You don't seem to have developed a close relationship with either a male or a female. And I'm not going to ask you, are you straight or lesbian? That's up to you to talk to me about if and whenever you want to talk to me about that. But I know from the appearances that you seem to have no close relationship with another human being. And I'm now listening to a lot of career confusion and uncertainty. Those are two strands of what you should have come clearer about while you were an adolescent and still in high school. And you'll still be working on that even though you're in college now. I said, I think it would be important for you to trace your birth families. And if you fill in that gap, I think it would free up energies and free up daydreams and free up something creative for you. And you'll be better able to plan for what your future life is going to be. I tell you that not as a father, but as a psychologist. I would urge a client of mine who behaves like you do to do exactly the same thing. And I'm prepared to help. And once again, she wanted no part of it. And on we went. And after about 6 years, yeah, that's about how long it took, of working in the University Abroad program, she got bored. She was making very slim money. They don't pay very well for the clerks who do that kind of helping. And she said, I have to do something else. And I said, well, what are you going to do? She said, I don't really know what to do. It's something I can do. It will at least give me some space to survive and think. I said, what do you think you're doing? Well, I have a degree and I'm fluent in French. I think I will apply to the Peace Corps, she said. They'll take care of me. They'll send me somewhere. I'll apply to go to a French-speaking country connected with France. And if I could be a Peace Corps worker, I'll be there for a year or two, and I'll do something I can feel proud of. I'll do some useful social work of some kind, and I'll get a chance to become even more fluent in French because I'll be in a French-speaking nation. And in my spare time, I can try and think, what am I going to do when my tour of duty as a Peace Corps worker is over? Maybe I'll know. So I complimented her and I told her about the work of Eric Erickson that I written about how important it is to have a moratorium, on the transit from adolescence to adulthood, a time when one is freed from ordinary responsibilities, often goes off into a strange place in the world, the wilderness, or a different culture, or a different socioeconomic surround in the culture, and stops doing all the ordinary things that have defined life, and is free to just meander around and try to brood about what is to become of me next. And that was wonderful that she was thinking of using the Peace Corps to give her that kind of moratorium. She certainly would be free to think of all kinds of possibilities she couldn't even imagine if she's in a third world country. And that's what she did. Yes, I think I'll do a great cliffhanger. It's only 5 o'clock now. So she was accepted. She was told she was going off to the Cameroon on the west coast of Africa, and she would be sent to a village in the hinterlands. The village would be, there's no paved road to the village. The village is a 6 hour ride on a truck. That's the only form of transportation to get there. There was no electricity, no running water, no plumbing in the village she was going to. And there was a very high infant mortality rate. So she had two assignments. One assignment was, since the people washed their clothes and defecated in the river that ran through the village, she was to do well digging. She was to find where there was sufficient groundwater, and she would install a pump, and it would be electric. There would be a solar panel on it, so it would run and pump water without labor. And the water would be fresh and pure, and it would not be full of germs and contaminated. And that should help the whole village and help the child mortality rate. And second of all, she was to teach literacy and conception. She was to teach those two topics to the women in the village, because the Peace Corps was developing more and more information that if you educate women, that is the most powerful tool that happens to start raising people out of poverty, and to start redressing male violence towards women. So she was going to be a teacher and a well engineer. And she was excited about both prospects. And as she was getting ready to leave, she was about a week before departing. She was walking on the streets of Westwood Village, getting some last minute things she wanted to pack and take with her. And who comes walking in the other direction but the social worker who had supervised both Josh's placement in my first marriage and Naomi's placement later on. And they knew each other because she was a very special person. She took an interest in the adoption she had arranged and would come by every few years. She would stay in touch and come by to visit the family and see how things were progressing. So she and Naomi knew each other by first name, and they stopped and they chatted. And the social worker said, "My life has been turned upside down. I no longer believe in closed adoptions and secrets and laws that control information. I have become, and I've written a book on the topic, a big fan of open adoptions. The adoptive parents should meet at least the birth mother, if not the birth father as well. They should meet the members of the other family. They should work out almost as if this was, and it is, these people who are giving up the baby are part of the new family that's being created. They should have, if they are interested, they should be allowed to visit. They should have some role in relating to the child. I am convinced that healthier and better functioning products of adoption would happen if there was that open boundary and the birth parents were simply seen as an increase in who the members of the family are. And I have been going around the country lecturing on this topic and trying to persuade adoption centers wherever I can to change the rule. And I've even testified before several state legislatures on changing the rules of confidentiality in the cases of adoption. So her last thing she said was, Naomi, I have been engaged in civil disobedience on this topic, and I copied every one of the files surreptitiously of all the people that I had placed while I was working in the agency. And I have the full file that contained things that were never told you. Would you like to see your file? And of course, who could resist that temptation? Naomi said, of course, I'd like to see that file. And the woman said, well, there is a change in California law. You can get the file yourself without my having to give you an illegal file. You may even be able to meet your birth mother without doing anything, because California law now says if the birth mother sends a notarized statement to the adoption center saying she's interested in being reconnected to the child that was given up, and if by some miracle the child in the course of life sends the same kind of letter to the adoption agency, then the adoption agency is now clear to arrange a meeting between the two parties and or to turn over the file. And why don't you get in touch with Vista Del Mar and see if there's anything on file from your birth mother? Is she interested in seeing you? Oh, they can't even tell you that. I'm sorry. You will have to file a document saying you're interested in meeting with her, and then they'll tell you if there's anything on file from her. They didn't tell her whether there was anything on file with you, and they won't. They can't. They all they could say is that they have no information at the present time. So if you want this to happen, if you want more information, you have to send such a letter. And Naomi called me in a panic. What am I going to do? I'm just getting ready to go to Senegal. This is bothering me. I said, well, take the next step. It's simple enough. It'll take you a day to find a notary public to get the letter written and to carry it over there. And maybe you'll know. Maybe that will be something you can daydream about while you're in Cameroon, not Senegal, while you're in Cameroon. Maybe you can think about whether you want to go forward with such a meeting, because the road will be open. So she did do that. She let the letter off, and off she went to Cameroon, and I will stop at that point. You could unmute and say whatever you'd like to say. You haven't even heard yet what I think are the worst things I did to Naomi, and why I think all the work I was trying to do to forward her life and to restore my connection with her failed.
I'm eager to hear that part, Arthur, and I was also thinking in some ways that what was Naomi's reaction to kind of like two parts of her growing up, which was in some ways that your experience and reaction to Josh, and also you're not really fighting the fight to kind of like have her in your life.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Thank you. You're anticipating where I have arrived. I think I have been framed in her mind as the abandoner. And that is a terrible thing for her. Her birth mother abandoned her first, and then I abandoned trying to capture control of her, and then I abandoned her brother and don't see him anymore. And I'll go on and on about that, about what other abandonments happened. But that's what and things she sees as abandonments, I don't see as abandonments at all. So that is the filter through which she evaluates my actions and my behavior. And I think I have lost the battle. She doesn't want the pain of any further abandonment of any kind.
I was also thinking about kind of like your next docudrama, which is, and I've heard other situations, other families who have had experiences of receiving damaged adoptees from Vista Del Mar.
You have?
Yes, I
Oh
have.
my God! Now you're adding to my file of misery.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but I've heard that, and I'm assuming that there's probably a fairly large history of that. There's a hunch that has kind of like occurred over the years. Just kind of like by hearing some of these stories.
Has anybody taken legal action against Mr. Elmore?
I don't know. I
That you
have
don't
no
know.
idea. Yeah.
I never even went so far as to even explore, is it possible to void a adoption? That would be a real abandonment. Oof.
Yeah.
I've heard of cases like that where in some ways that they forced a kind of a return, a family to
Did they do that before the adoption was final?
I think I don't know. I don't know the details, but I know that then some ways that it was kind of like determined that the child was severely damaged, and then they, I think ultimately returned the child.
Oh. That's a strange gift you gave me.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. It says in the Christian New Testament, the truth shall make you free. All right. I will continue next week. Naomi's story becomes quite magical for a period of time before it collapsed into nothingness. So I have a magical story to tell. Thank
Okay,
God.
we'll look forward to that part.
Oh, and
Yes.
I have to remember to send you the stuff for the other episodes. I will.
All right, great. We'll get 'em.
Bye.
All right, bye, guys.
See you guys.